Due to the combination of their traits, INFJs have the ability to outmaneuver their opponents in ways that are often imperceptible until it's too late. Their genius lies not in overt aggression or flashy displays of intelligence, but in subtle psychological strategies that leave opponents disoriented, underestimating them until their own plans begin to unravel. One of the most effective ways INFJs outsmart their enemies is through their deep understanding of human behavior. As natural empaths and intuitive feelers, they can detect the emotional undercurrents of a situation with uncanny precision. They observe patterns others miss, tone, body language, inconsistencies in speech, and synthesize this data almost subconsciously. When faced with a rival, an INFJ is likely to sense hidden insecurities, motivations, and potential weaknesses long before any confrontation occurs. This insight becomes a tactical advantage. Rather than confronting directly, they might subtly mirror their opponent's fears back at them, creating an environment where the enemy feels increasingly uneasy and unsure of their footing. Unlock the power of your INFJ personality. Check out our INFJ Mastery course and INFJ ebook. The links are in the description of this video. INFJs also use strategic withdrawal. Unlike more overtly combative types, INFJs do not thrive on constant confrontation. Instead, they may withdraw from direct engagement, giving the impression of retreat or defeat. This is often a deliberate move. During this time, they're not surrendering, they're recalibrating. They analyze, reflect, and develop a long-term plan that accounts for not just immediate responses, but ripple effects far down the line. By the time they re-engage, they often hold the emotional or intellectual high ground, having understood not only their own strengths but how their enemy's approach has evolved or stagnated. INFJs are also good at selective revelation. They tend to keep their truest thoughts and intentions closely guarded, sharing only what is necessary, and often cloaking their objectives in ambiguity. This can be deeply confusing to adversaries, who find it difficult to pin them down or predict their moves. Their conversations might seem vague or overly diplomatic on the surface, but within them lies a carefully curated set of signals meant to seed doubt, redirect focus, or lull their opponents into underestimating them. An enemy may think they have the INFJ figured out, only to find themselves acting on false assumptions deliberately planted by the INFJ's quiet narrative weaving. An underestimated form of manipulation that INFJs use is kindness. Their empathy, when turned strategic, becomes a form of soft power. An INFJ might offer unexpected understanding or support to someone who considers them a threat. This disarms the opponent and reframes the dynamic. Suddenly, the adversary questions their own motives or even begins to trust the INFJ. It's not uncommon for enemies to find themselves voluntarily revealing their intentions or even shifting allegiances under the influence of an INFJ's calculated benevolence. To many, this feels like magic, but to the INFJ, it's simply the result of acute emotional intelligence applied with precision. INFJs also operate with a long memory and a quiet sense of justice. They rarely forget betrayals or slights, even if they appear to forgive and move on. While others may react impulsively, INFJs prefer to wait. They collect information, bide their time, and often allow their enemies to entangle themselves in their own web of missteps. When an INFJ finally acts, it's with an inevitability that seems almost fated. Their interventions are often surgical, one move, expertly placed, that destabilizes everything their opponent has built. The beauty of it is that, often, their enemies don't even realize the INFJ was behind their downfall until the dust has settled. Misdirection is another art in the INFJ's arsenal. They can project vulnerability or naivety to create a false sense of security in those who would exploit them. Adversaries often assume the INFJ lacks the grit or cunning to pose a real threat, but this miscalculation can be their undoing. The INFJ, aware of how they are being perceived, may use this to maneuver around their opponent's defenses, executing a plan while the other party remains convinced of their superiority. In essence, the INFJ uses perception as both a shield and a sword. INFJs are masters of timing. They understand when to speak and when to remain silent, when to push and when to yield. This sense of timing, almost mystical in its accuracy, ensures that when they choose to make a move, it has maximum impact. Their actions often seem subtle at first, but they carry an accumulated weight that can alter the course of relationships, conflicts, and entire group dynamics. In all of this, the true brilliance of the INFJ's strategy lies in its invisibility. They don't outsmart their enemies with brute force or overt genius, but with layers of insight, empathy, and long-term vision. Their tactics don't look like tactics. They look like coincidence, change of heart, or even the enemy's own undoing. By the time their adversaries realize they've been outmaneuvered, the INFJ is already several steps ahead, watching quietly as the dominoes fall. Another powerful tool INFJs wield is the art of psychological projection, not in the Freudian sense, but rather, they have an uncanny ability to make others see what they want them to see. They can cloak themselves in whatever persona suits the moment. The harmless idealist, the agreeable friend, the fragile empath. These personas act like smokescreens. Enemies waste time and energy responding to a facade while the real INFJ quietly maneuvers behind the curtain. They may lead their adversaries to believe they are dependent, indecisive, or too idealistic to pose a threat. All the while, they're watching, documenting, and anticipating every future move. Then there's their method of orchestrating outcomes without appearing to. INFJs rarely need to dominate a conversation or a space to exert influence. Their power often lies in gentle redirection, a well-placed question, a reflective silence, a seemingly benign observation. These moments plant subtle ideas or doubts that grow slowly in the minds of others, eventually steering people in the direction the INFJ wants. And the beauty of it is, those people often believe the idea was their own. This sort of intellectual inception isn't accidental. It's the result of quiet, meticulous psychological architecture that makes INFJs seem almost prophetic in their manipulations. Another trait that surprised their opponents is the INFJ's tendency to remain composed under pressure. Their calm, even serene demeanor is disarming. While others become reactive or aggressive when challenged, the INFJ remains measured and thoughtful. This unnerves enemies who are expecting a fight. Instead of being drawn into petty conflict, the INFJ transcends it, operating on a plane that feels just out of reach. This psychological elevation gives them an edge, positioning them as untouchable or above the fray, a position that affords them both influence and strategic clarity. Even their silence can be weaponized. INFJs know when silence speaks louder than argument, when a look or a pause can unnerve more than any word. This silence forces the other person to project their own insecurities, fears, or assumptions into the void, and the INFJ just watches, learning everything they need without uttering a single sentence. It's not passive, it's diagnostic. They also play the long game better than most. INFJs are not impulsive, they're planners. They often think in terms of months or years rather than days or weeks. They understand that short-term victories can lead to long-term vulnerabilities. So instead of trying to win an argument or dominate a moment, they aim to shift the entire narrative of a situation. Enemies may win a battle here or there, but over time, the INFJ's influence rewrites the context in which those battles occur. By the time their opponent realizes the rules have changed, the INFJ has already won. INFJs rarely allow themselves to become perceived as the threat. They often place themselves in peripheral roles, the advisor, the supporter, the listener, while gently guiding the actual power holders. They know that real influence doesn't always require visibility. In fact, being unseen often enhances their effectiveness. This subtlety is baffling to more direct personalities who equate power with dominance, failing to realize that the soft-spoken INFJ may be the one pulling the strings. When confronted directly, INFJs can also deliver devastatingly surgical verbal responses. While they usually avoid unnecessary conflict, when forced into it, their words become precision-guided missiles. Drawing on their deep understanding of human nature, they can articulate someone's deepest fear, flaw, or hypocrisy in a way that feels almost clairvoyant. And they don't need to shout or insult. A few quiet, truth-laden words are often enough to pierce through an enemy's defenses and shake their confidence to the core. One of the most quietly effective tactics INFJs use is internal mirroring. Not only do they observe and understand others with surgical clarity, but they also reflect back those behaviors and emotional tones in a way that creates intense discomfort or confusion in adversaries. When dealing with manipulation, control, or dishonesty, the INFJ might subtly imitate the manipulator's tactics, but with just enough amplification to make the enemy question their own methods. This controlled mirroring can be deeply unsettling. It puts the opponent in a psychological hall of mirrors, unsure where their own behavior ends and the INFJ's begins. Another layer to their strategy is their mastery of the long silence. INFJs often withdraw in moments of tension or crisis, not because they're weak or overwhelmed, but because they're watching, taking in every move, recalibrating their response. In this pause, they gather intelligence. They watch how others behave when they think the INFJ has backed down or disappeared. This silence often tempts enemies into overplaying their hand, revealing their true intentions, or losing discipline. By the time the INFJ reemerges, often with a calm and composed demeanor, they've already mapped out their next 10 steps. That temporary silence wasn't a retreat, it was reconnaissance. They also wield emotional leverage with surgical precision. INFJs understand how people's past wounds shape their behavior, and they can use that understanding to subtly guide others into emotional territory they can't control. For example, if an enemy has a need to be validated, admired, or feared, the INFJ might initially feed that need strategically. This creates dependence or overconfidence in the opponent. Then, just when the enemy has come to rely on that emotional reinforcement, the INFJ quietly pulls back or redirects it. This shift throws the enemy off balance, prompting insecurity, self-doubt, or even panic, often without the INFJ saying a single critical word. There's also their use of controlled transparency. INFJs are often mistaken for being fully open, simply because they share so eloquently and emotionally when they choose to. But what they share is often a carefully chosen set of truths, not lies, but truths selected for effect. This partial self-disclosure builds trust, lowers defenses, and makes others believe they truly understand the INFJ. The mistake many adversaries make is assuming this surface-level vulnerability means access to the INFJ's core. It doesn't. The core remains hidden, protected by layers of insight, boundary, and will. While the enemy feels closer, the INFJ remains untouched, still gathering data and quietly outmaneuvering the situation. One of the most confounding qualities of the INFJ is their ability to create an environment where others expose themselves. They don't have to pry, accuse, or interrogate. Instead, they create emotional space, a kind of non-judgmental presence, where people feel strangely compelled to open up. Even enemies, under the soft gaze of the INFJ's empathy, often reveal more than they should. The INFJ just listens, absorbs, and later pieces together the full picture. By the time an adversary realizes how much they've said or shown, it's too late. The INFJ holds the blueprint of their psyche and now knows exactly how to dismantle it if necessary. INFJs also masterfully exploit social perception. They tend to appear trustworthy, gentle, and principled, and they often are. But this reputation becomes a strategic shield. In group dynamics, others are far more likely to believe the INFJ over someone more outwardly aggressive or defensive. This gives INFJs a rare form of ethical power, influence that doesn't need to be asserted, only subtly directed. When conflicts arise, others often instinctively take the INFJ's side, sensing sincerity and depth, while distrusting the bombast of a more obvious antagonist. The INFJ doesn't need to convince. Their integrity does the work for them. When cornered, INFJs can also unleash what might be called surgical coldness. Though warm and compassionate by nature, they're capable of going emotionally ice cold if a boundary is violated. This withdrawal of warmth, often delivered with unnerving calmness, can be far more devastating than anger. The enemy, used to the INFJ's empathy and attentiveness, suddenly finds themselves shut out, observed instead of understood. It's not cruel, it's precise. It makes a statement without drama, often prompting deep self-reflection or emotional collapse in the one who pushed too far. INFJs possess what could be called invisible vengeance. They are slow to act and reluctant to harm, but if truly betrayed, they will dismantle an opponent without ever appearing to strike. They won't lash out or publicly humiliate. Instead, they might slowly unravel the person's credibility, reveal just enough truth to shift perception, or introduce subtle chaos into their enemy support system. Their revenge isn't loud, it's elegant, patient, and almost poetic. It's the quiet closing of a door that never reopens. What's most brilliant is that throughout all of this, the INFJ's hands often remain clean. They orchestrate their moves with such subtlety that others may never see the full extent of their influence. To an outsider, events seem to unfold naturally, as though the INFJ simply got lucky or rose above the drama. But the truth is far more intricate. The INFJ saw the pattern before anyone else and used time, empathy, and quiet brilliance to guide it into place. Unlock the power of your INFJ personality. Check out our INFJ Mastery course and INFJ ebook. The links are in the description of this video.